There are people you meet, quietly, without fanfare, and something in them feels older than their age. Not in the way of wrinkles or gray hair, but in the stillness they carry. In their eyes. In the way they pause before speaking. In the softness of their presence. It feels like they've lived more than one life. We call them old souls. And you don't always notice them right away. They're not loud. They don't demand attention. But if you sit with them long enough, if you let silence stretch instead of rushing to fill it, you'll feel it, the depth, the weight, the knowing that comes from somewhere beyond years. I remember the first time someone called me an old soul. I was 17, listening to a stranger talk about their pain, and I didn't offer advice. I just nodded. Stayed. Listened. Later they said, "You make me feel like I've known you before." At the time, I didn't think much of it. But the words stayed. Like certain truths do, soft, patient, waiting for the right moment to be understood. Years later, I began to notice the pattern. I'd always felt older than my surroundings. Not smarter. Not better. Just, like I was watching the world from a slightly different angle. When other kids were dreaming of fame, I was reading about forgotten people in history books. When everyone rushed toward noise, I walked slower, wondering why we were always in such a hurry. Even as a child, I remember thinking, I don't belong to this pace. I belong to something slower. Something quieter. Something older. That's often the first sign of an old soul, not a preference, but a pull. A gravitational tug toward depth, toward meaning, toward moments that matter. Old souls don't chase the surface. Not because they're too good for it, but because they've tasted something deeper. Maybe in this life. Maybe in one before. Of course, that kind of awareness can be lonely. Especially when you're young. While others are talking about plans and status and what's trending, the old soul is somewhere else, wondering why everyone seems so afraid of stillness. So allergic to silence. So quick to fill every space with more. I've been in rooms full of laughter and felt like a visitor from another world. Not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I couldn't stop seeing the sadness behind someone's smile. It's like I was built to notice what others missed. That kind of sensitivity, the kind that feels both like a gift and a weight, is another sign. Old souls tend to feel everything more deeply. Not just their own emotions, but the unspoken ones around them. They can walk into a room and feel tension before anyone speaks. They can read a glance like a sentence. They can hold space for someone's story, even if that story is broken, unfinished, or hard to hear. And they do it without judgment. Because somewhere inside, they remember what it feels like to be misunderstood. Old souls aren't here to fix people. They're here to witness. To hold. To remind others they're not alone, even in their strangest thoughts. Sometimes I wonder if I really have lived other lives. Because how else could I explain this quiet familiarity with grief, this strange comfort with letting go? There's a calmness old souls carry, not because their life has been easy, but because they've learned not to resist what can't be changed. They've walked through enough endings to know that not all closure comes with answers. Sometimes it just comes with acceptance. You'll find them sitting at the edge of a crowded space, not needing to be the center. You'll find them listening more than they speak. You'll find them drawn to old music, handwritten letters, timeless things that don't expire. They're not nostalgic. They're anchored. And you might mistake them for shy, aloof, or withdrawn. But give them space, a quiet place, an honest question, and they'll unfold like a story you didn't know you needed to hear. I don't know why I cry at music I've never heard before. Or why I feel connected to people I've only just met. But I think being an old soul means you remember things your mind can't explain, and feel things your heart hasn't learned to name. It doesn't make you better. Just different. And in a world that rewards fast, loud, and new, being slow, quiet, and deep can feel like being left behind. But old souls aren't behind. They're just tuned to something else. Something older than time. Something that whispers instead of shouts. And if you've ever felt that, the weight of invisible memory, the ache of unspoken truths, the comfort of stillness no one else understands, maybe you're one of us. Not everyone enjoys small talk, but for the old soul, it's more than just a preference. It's a kind of hunger. A longing not for more words, but for truer ones. They're the kind of people who can sit in a crowd and feel completely alone, not because they dislike others, but because surface conversation drains them. They need something deeper. Something real. Something that doesn't vanish as soon as the room empties. I've always struggled with "so, what do you do?" Not because I can't answer it, but because I don't think it tells anyone who I am. Ask me what breaks my heart. Ask me what I notice when no one's watching. Then we're really talking. Old souls crave connection. Not attention. There's a difference. They're not looking to be the loudest voice in the room, they're just hoping someone, somewhere, might be willing to speak from the quietest part of themselves. And when they find that, even just once, they bloom. Because truth is where they feel at home. They're drawn to conversations that linger. That don't have neat endings. That explore questions without rushing toward answers. Conversations that leave room for silence, for reflection, for the kind of honesty that can't be polished. They often feel out of place in fast-moving environments. Parties that pulse too loud, meetings that skim too quickly, exchanges that begin and end before anything meaningful is said. I've left rooms full of people and felt lonelier than I do when I'm alone. Because I wasn't really there, just playing a part. Nodding, smiling, floating above myself. It's not that old souls can't function in noisy places, they can. Many learn to adapt. But inside, they're always looking for that moment when something clicks, a pause, a look, a sentence that opens a door. That's when they step in. Fully. Because when depth is present, so are they. They notice things that others miss, the way someone hesitates before speaking, the way joy flickers even in a tired smile, the way grief hides behind a joke. They hear what's said between the words. And they don't rush to respond. They wait. They hold. They allow space for others to unfold without pressure. I don't want to impress you. I want to understand you. And maybe, if we're both honest, understand myself through our conversation too. That's why old souls are often the ones people open up to without knowing why. Something about their presence invites the deeper parts of others to rise to the surface. They don't gossip. They don't interrupt. They don't try to fix you when you speak. They just sit there, still and soft, like a mirror that reflects without judgment. And it's not because they have everything figured out. It's because they've stopped pretending to. They've lived long enough, in years, or just an inner weight, to know that the most important questions rarely have clean answers. That being heard is often more healing than being solved. Sometimes I wonder if I speak too slowly for this world. But then I remember, the deepest rivers don't rush. They shape everything in their path simply by being steady. That's what old souls do, not loudly, not quickly, not perfectly, but deeply. They shape others through presence, through patience, through the kind of listening that doesn't flinch when things get real. So if you're someone who's always longed for quieter rooms, fuller conversations, softer truths, if you've ever felt like your heart speaks a different language, not better, just deeper, maybe it's because you're not wired for noise. Maybe it's because you were born for depth. not everyone enjoys solitude. But the old soul, they often seek it. Not because they dislike people, but because being alone doesn't feel like a punishment to them. It feels like home. They're not afraid of their own company. In fact, they value it, guard it, even. Time alone isn't something to be endured. It's something to return to. A kind of stillness where their truest self can stretch out, breathe deeply, and just be. I've always found silence kinder than noise. There's something honest about a quiet room. It doesn't ask anything of me. It just lets me exist. Old souls are rarely bored when alone. They walk, they sit, they read. They listen to the soft things, a bird's call in the distance, the sound of the kettle, the creak of the wooden floor beneath their feet. They have conversations in their mind that are more real than some they've had aloud. They're not hiding from the world, they're simply not defined by it. Of course, this doesn't mean they don't feel lonely. Even the oldest souls do. But there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. And the old soul knows how to sit with the first, without fearing the second. Some of the most honest moments of my life happened when no one else was around. Moments when I looked at the sky and felt connected to something I couldn't name. Moments when I cried and didn't rush to stop myself. When I felt more myself than ever. That's the gift of solitude to an old soul. It's not escape. It's returning. To their thoughts. To their spirit. To the small voice inside that gets drowned out in too much company. They don't chase constant stimulation. They're not addicted to attention. They're content to sit in a cafe with a book, to walk through the woods without music in their ears, to make tea not for someone else, but for the simple ritual of caring for themselves. There's something timeless about that. Something almost monastic. And it confuses others sometimes. They'll ask, "Don't you get bored?" Or say, "I could never live alone." But for the old soul, solitude is not emptiness. It's spaciousness. A room that doesn't echo. A day without rush. A heart that isn't pulled in every direction. I've always believed that if I couldn't enjoy being alone, I'd never fully understand who I am. And if I didn't understand who I am, how could I ever offer something real to someone else? They've learned that the best conversations often happen internally, after the noise has died down. That peace isn't found in more, but in enough. And that there is strength in standing still, while the world spins faster and faster. It doesn't mean they're closed off. When they love fully. When they connect, it's deep and true. But they don't need to always be surrounded to feel alive. They carry life within. So if you find someone who doesn't fear silence, who can sit beside you without filling the air, who doesn't panic when a plan is canceled, but quietly enjoys the sudden gift of an unclaimed hour, you might be in the presence of an old soul. Being alone isn't what isolates me. Pretending to be someone I'm not, that's what makes me feel most alone. And so, they choose solitude not as a hiding place, but as sacred ground. A place where they meet themselves fully, without needing to explain, perform, or be on. A place where they return to truth. Over and over again. There's something about them, the old souls. Something you can't quite name. It's not in the way they speak, or dress, or move through the world. It's in the way their eyes seem to hold more than this moment. As if they've seen something, or lost something, that never quite left. A quiet sadness. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present. Like a note held softly beneath every word they say. Someone once asked me, "Why do you always look like you're remembering something that hurt?" I didn't have an answer then. But I think it's because I am. Old souls often carry this subtle sorrow, not because something is wrong, but because they see what others overlook. They notice the fleetingness of things. The way joy is beautiful because it passes. The way people say goodbye too soon, or never quite say what they mean. The way time keeps moving, even when you're not ready to let go. And when you carry that kind of seeing, it stays with you. Not as a burden, but as a kind of tenderness. They grieve not just for their own losses, but for everyone's. For the child walking home alone. For the grandmother waiting by the phone. For the stranger who tries to smile through tired eyes. I don't cry easily in front of others. But sometimes, at night, a song will play, and something inside me opens like a window. And I feel the ache of 1,000 small goodbyes I never said aloud. This sadness doesn't make them gloomy. In fact, many old souls are full of light, full of gentle humor, quiet joy, deep presence. But underneath, there is always that thread, the one that tugs at them when the room falls still, or when the light shifts just right across the floor. It's not depression. It's depth. It's not hopelessness. It's awareness. They know that everything ends. That everything changes. That nothing is guaranteed. And so they hold things more tenderly. They love with full hearts. They pause longer at sunsets. They remember the details of a goodbye most people forget. They've learned not to take things for granted, not because they were taught to, but because they've felt the ache of things that didn't last. I think that's why I speak slowly sometimes. Because every word feels like something I might never get back. And this quiet sadness, it's not a flaw. It's part of their beauty. It softens them, grounds them, reminds them of what matters. It's why they're so good at being there for others, without judgment, without rush. They know how to sit in hard places. They don't flinch when someone cries. They don't look away when someone says, "I'm not okay." Because they've been there. And they know that sometimes, what we need most is not a solution, but a witness. Sometimes, I think my sadness isn't even mine. It's borrowed from all the people I've ever listened to. From all the hearts I've held without touching. Old souls aren't here to escape sadness. They're here to carry it gently. To make peace with it. To remind the world that sorrow isn't weakness, it's evidence that you've cared. And in a world that rushes to numb, to fix, to move on, they remain. Still. Soft. Present. Old souls often feel a quiet pull toward the past, not in a way that clings, but in a way that reveres. They linger over old photographs. They run their fingers across worn book spines. They pause at faded letters and the crackle of a vinyl record like someone listening for something lost. It's not nostalgia. It's something deeper. As if the past still whispers to them in a language they almost remember. I've always felt more at home in old things than in new ones. Give me a chipped cup over a brand new glass any day. There's something about imperfection that feels more honest. They are naturally drawn to anything with a soul, not in the spiritual sense alone, but in the lived-in sense. Things with a story. With texture. With time. The modern world moves fast, favors sleekness, discards what doesn't shine. But old souls pause where others rush past. A handwritten note. A melody from the 1930s. The way an old chair creaks when you sit just right. To most, these are forgettable. To an old soul, they are sacred. It's not that they reject the present, they live in it, with care. But they often feel the present is too quick to erase what came before. And so, they collect pieces of it, not as trophies, but as anchors. I keep a drawer full of things I don't need, but can't throw away. A train ticket from a quiet day. A torn note from someone who's no longer here. They remind me that life happens in layers, and every layer matters. They are fascinated by history, not just events, but the humanness within them. What people hoped for. What they feared. How they said goodbye. They wonder about the stories behind old buildings, worn shoes, faded handwriting. They don't just see objects. They see echoes. And when they meet people who've lived longer, they don't dismiss them. They sit down. They listen. They ask questions and wait for the pauses. Because they know that wisdom doesn't always speak in headlines, sometimes it murmurs through trembling hands and watery eyes. I used to visit my grandfather just to hear him tell the same story again. Not because I forgot the words, but because I loved the way his voice slowed down when he remembered. It felt like time gave us permission to rest in something that wasn't urgent. Old souls respect slowness. They're drawn to rituals, brewing tea, lighting a candle, folding a blanket with intention. These moments aren't old-fashioned to them. They're grounding. They understand that time isn't something to beat, but something to move with. That's why they often feel out of place in a world obsessed with upgrades. A new phone. A faster car. A fresher trend. But to them, value doesn't come from how new something is, but from how long it has stayed. They don't want what's trending. They want what endures. Maybe that's why I love old trees. Not because they're majestic, but because they've seen so much and still remain rooted. That's how I want to be, quiet, steady, still here. This draw toward the past isn't about escaping. It's about remembering. Remembering that we're part of a long, winding story, and that what came before us still matters. Old souls carry pieces of history in their hearts. Not for show, but because they've made peace with impermanence. And in doing so, they find beauty not just in what lasts, but in what has lasted. Old souls have a quiet way of moving through the world. You won't find them in every trending space, wearing the latest thing, saying what everyone else says. Not because they're trying to be different, but because they've never felt the need to keep up. They're not impressed by flash. Not interested in fast. Not pulled by popularity. Instead, they live by something slower, a rhythm that isn't influenced by algorithms or applause. I've never really cared about what's in. I wear what's comfortable. I speak when I have something to say. I choose what lasts over what shines. And for the longest time, I thought that made me strange. Now, I just think it makes me still. To the old soul, trend chasing feels like noise. A constant reaching, for approval, for novelty, for distraction. But they've seen enough to know, what matters doesn't need to be loud. They'd rather reread an old book than scroll through a dozen new headlines. They'd rather keep one well-worn coat than 10 new outfits they'll never really love. They know who they are, not completely, but enough to not need the world to define them. They're not easily influenced, not because they're stubborn, but because they've learned to listen inward. Their compass doesn't swing with the crowd. It turns with integrity. With feeling. With instinct. There's a kind of peace that comes from not needing to catch up. When you stop running, you start noticing more. And what you notice becomes more meaningful. Old souls walk into a room and don't need to dominate it. They're not trying to stand out, but somehow, they often do. Because stillness is rare. Because steadiness draws attention in a world that's always chasing something new. They choose slowly. They speak carefully. They change only when it feels real, not when it's expected. And because of that, people sometimes misunderstand them. Call them out of touch. Or too quiet. Or behind. But they're not behind. They're just in their own time. They've learned that moving slower doesn't mean moving without purpose. It means moving with more intention. With more meaning. I'd rather be late to 100 parties than arrive on time to a place that doesn't feel like mine. They value consistency over excitement, wisdom over noise, presence over performance. They aren't anti-modern. They simply don't let trends dictate what they value. They'll listen to a new song if it speaks to the heart. Try a new idea if it aligns with their truth. But never because they were told to. Only because it resonates. There's something timeless about that. Something rooted. They don't rush to reinvent themselves. They evolve gently. Not with a bang, but with a breath. And when the world moves too fast, they step back. Not to escape, but to remember who they are when no one's watching. I've let go of the need to be seen by everyone. I just want to be known by a few, deeply, honestly, quietly. Old souls understand that it's not about being in. It's about being real. And real doesn't expire. In a world where everyone seems eager to talk, to post, to react, the old soul remains quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand the weight of words. And they believe in giving silence a place in the conversation. They're the kind of people who don't interrupt. Who wait. Who let you finish your sentence, even when they already know where it's going. Because they don't listen to reply. They listen to understand. I've never liked talking over people. I wait for the pauses, the hesitations. That's where the truth usually lives. And when someone says, "I've never told this to anyone," I listen even harder. Because I know how rare it is to be truly heard. Old souls are natural listeners, not by accident, but by instinct. They know that real connection isn't built through clever words, but through quiet presence. They don't fill every silence. They don't rush to fix. They don't pretend to know more than they do. Instead, they hold space. You'll find them sitting across from someone in a cafe, eyes soft, body still, saying less, but meaning more. And it's in that stillness that people often find themselves opening up in unexpected ways. Because there's something disarming about being truly heard. Sometimes I think people just need one safe moment, one room where they're not judged, rushed, or corrected. If I can offer that, I think that's enough. Old souls understand that not every story needs a solution. Some just need a witness. And in a time where attention is fragmented, and conversations compete with screens, they offer something different, full presence. They make you feel like you're the only person in the room. Because, to them, you are. For that moment, nothing else matters more than the truth you're trying to share. It's not performative. They don't listen to gain your favor. They listen because they care. Deeply. They've known what it's like to speak into empty air. To say something raw and be met with silence, or worse, dismissal. And they vowed, quietly, never to let someone else feel that way in their presence. I've sat with people in grief, in anger, in complete silence. And sometimes, the best thing I offered wasn't advice, it was staying. Not looking away. Not filling the room with noise. Just being there. That's what they do best. They stay. They don't turn every moment into a teaching point. They don't need to prove what they know. They know that wisdom isn't in always having the answer, sometimes, it's in asking the gentler question. Old souls can sit through discomfort. They don't rush pain out of the room. They've lived long enough, emotionally or otherwise, to know that healing doesn't always sound like "you'll be okay." Sometimes it sounds like, "I'm here. I hear you. Take your time." I think that's why people often say, "I've never told this to anyone before around me." Not because I'm special, but because I wait long enough for them to feel safe. And when they do speak, old souls choose their words with care. Not to impress, but to offer something real. something useful, something soft. Their silence isn't empty. It's intentional. It's the silence of someone who understands that deep truths don't shout, they whisper. And to hear them, you have to be still enough to listen. Old souls don't move through life casually. Even the smallest details, a phrase spoken offhand, a leaf falling just so, a familiar scent on an unfamiliar street, they notice it. And not only that, they wonder what it means. It's not that they overthink everything. It's that they feel everything carries something worth noticing. I've always believed nothing shows up without a reason. Not every reason needs to be grand, but there's always something to pay attention to. A glance. A pause. A shift in tone. It's all telling a story. Where others see coincidence, the old soul often sees a thread. A subtle pattern. A whisper of something deeper. A lesson. A reminder. A question asking to be heard. They believe in the unseen connections between things, not in a mystical or forced way, but with a kind of reverent curiosity. When a stranger says something kind, they carry it longer than most. When a delay causes them to pause, they wonder what they might have been protected from. When they cross paths with someone unexpectedly, they don't just say, "What a coincidence." They say, "Interesting timing." Because they live in a world where moments are not just moments, they are messages. And meaning isn't something to be proven. It's something to be felt. Even my pain. I've tried to see it not as punishment, but as invitation. To understand more. To slow down. To become softer, instead of smaller. Old souls often find themselves reflecting long after the moment has passed. What was said? What wasn't? What stirred something deep inside? They replay conversations not out of anxiety, but because they believe even offhand words can carry unexpected depth. This tendency doesn't always make life easier. It can make them more sensitive. More prone to feeling too much. But it also makes them more awake. More present. More attuned to what others miss. They don't need everything to be profound, they just don't want to sleepwalk through life. They want to taste it. Feel it. Understand what it's trying to say. That's why old souls are often drawn to poetry, to metaphor, to stories that don't tie everything up neatly. Because life isn't neat. And they're not looking for perfection, they're looking for presence. A tree shedding its leaves isn't just a season to me. It's a reminder, there is beauty in letting go. And even more beauty in trusting that what's bare now will bloom again later. They seek meaning not for the sake of control, but for connection. With themselves. With others. With something larger than both. It's why they're good at finding the silver thread in a hard time. Why they pause at sunsets and let it move them. Why they sit with someone in pain and don't try to cheer them up, but instead say, "What is this teaching you?" They believe that even suffering holds wisdom, if you're gentle enough to ask, and still enough to listen. In this depth, this meaning-making, it's not always visible. From the outside, they may seem quiet, even distracted. But inside, they are wide awake, watching, feeling, holding space for the sacred hidden within the ordinary. Maybe that's why I take longer to move on from things. Because I'm not trying to just get over it. I want to understand it. Honor it. Let it leave something good behind before it goes. That's what old souls do. They don't rush through the chapters of life. They read each one slowly, underline the lines that move them, and sit with the parts that hurt, until they've learned what they were meant to learn. Not because they want to be wise, but because they want to live fully. Even in the ache. Even in the quiet. Even in the questions that never quite get answered. Pain doesn't frighten them. Not because they enjoy it, but because they've walked beside it long enough to stop flinching. Old souls don't rush to fix what's broken. They sit with it. They stay. They know that pain, like all things, wants to be seen before it begins to soften. While others turn away, they turn toward. Not out of obligation, but out of understanding. I don't look away when someone cries anymore. I used to, out of politeness, or maybe discomfort. But now, I know that tears are not a weakness. They're a language some people have never been allowed to speak out loud. Old souls recognize pain because they've met it, not just once, but often. In loss. In silence. In the places where love didn't stay. They've sat through nights where sleep didn't come. They've carried regrets too heavy to name. But instead of turning bitter, they turned inward. They learned that pain doesn't have to harden you. It can soften you, if you let it teach instead of consume. So when someone else is hurting, they don't try to fix it with platitudes. They don't say, everything happens for a reason, or it could be worse. They say, I know. I hear you. I'm here. And they mean it. Because they remember how much those words mattered when they were the ones in the dark. I once sat with a friend who lost everything in a single season. And I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I made tea. I sat beside her. I breathed quietly. She later told me that was what saved her. Not advice. Not answers. Just presence. That's the gift old souls offer. They can hold space. They can witness your ache without shrinking from it. Because they've already faced their own. And they know that pain, when shared gently, can become something else entirely, connection. They are not afraid of the messy, the uncertain, the unresolved. They know that healing isn't a straight line, and that some wounds never quite close, they just stop bleeding. They know how to sit in that liminal space, between heartbreak and hope, and not rush through it. There were years when I didn't speak about what hurt. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't think anyone would understand. So now, when someone starts to open up, I lean in. Because I remember what it felt like to wonder if anyone was truly listening. Old souls have turned their scars into empathy. They've turned their quiet grief into quiet grace. They don't need to be the strong one all the time. But they've learned how to be strong in the right moments, not with force, but with gentleness. And perhaps most beautifully, they know how to sit with your pain without making it about them. They don't redirect. They don't compare. They don't minimize. They just sit beside you and say with their presence, you don't have to go through this alone. You've met them before. You just might not have known what to call it. There's a person who walks into a room and doesn't say much, and yet, suddenly, everything feels calmer. Like the air changed. Like the moment settled. Like you could exhale for the first time in a while. That's the old soul's quietest magic. They bring peace, not because they try to, but because it lives inside them. They don't need to fix you. They don't need to cheer you up. They don't even need to speak. Sometimes, their simple presence, their way of sitting fully with you, of listening without fidgeting, of looking at you like you matter, that's enough. I've been told I have a calming energy, though I've never tried to create it. I think it comes from all the storms I've walked through alone. When you've made peace with your own darkness, you stop being afraid of someone else's. Old souls have a way of grounding a moment. They carry time differently. They don't rush. They're not trying to impress you. They're simply present. And in a world full of urgency, presence feels like a gift. They remind you, without saying it, that there's no need to perform. That you can be soft here. Quiet here. Exactly as you are. They don't need to be the center of the room to hold it together. They don't need attention to feel real. They simply are. And that being invites others to breathe easier. Some people walk in and bring excitement. I've never been that person. But sometimes, someone sits beside me and sighs like they've finally stopped running. And in that sigh, I know I've offered something real. That's the final sign of an old soul. They leave a soft imprint. Not a big one. Not a flashy one. But one that lingers. You might not remember exactly what they said. But you'll remember how you felt near them, safe, steady, whole. Because their peace isn't performative. It's earned. Through solitude. Through grief. Through quiet mornings. Through all the moments they sat with themselves and chose stillness over struggle. Through years of learning to be kind to what hurt inside them, until it no longer needed to fight back. And that kind of inner work doesn't shout. It hums. It rests. It glows. And when it touches others, it doesn't demand gratitude, it simply gives. Old souls often go unnoticed. But when you notice them, something in you shifts. They remind you of what really matters. Of what endures. Of what doesn't need to be loud to be true. I've never wanted to be unforgettable. I've only hoped that maybe, just maybe, I could help someone feel less alone for a moment. And if that's all I ever give, then I think that's more than enough.